Hello and welcome to the 2025 Southwest Drought and Wildfire Summer Outlook webinar with NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. I'm Meredith Muth, the acting NIDIS coordinator for the Intermountain West Regional Drought Early Warning System. For those unfamiliar with NIDIS, this interagency program, hosted by NOAA, was created by Congress with a mandate to help the nation prepare for, mitigate, and respond to the effects of drought. NIDIS does this through a series of activities, including the coordination of regional drought early warning systems, shown on the map here, and delivering information on drought conditions and impacts. For more information on NIDIS and the regional dues, please visit the links in the chat box. This webinar today will provide a cross-regional dues perspective on drought across the broader southwestern U.S. Today's webinar will provide an update in the region and current outlooks, as well as a look at the upcoming monsoon and wildland fire season. Our first speaker will be Andrea Baer from the National Weather Service Western Region, who will provide a regional drought update and outlook. Our second speaker will be Mike Crimmins, a professor and extension specialist from the University of Arizona, who will provide an update on the 2025 Southwest monsoon. And our final speaker will be Jim Wallman from the National Interagency Coordination Center Predictive Service at the Bureau of Land Management, who will provide a Southwest wildland fire potential outlook. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today. Questions for the speakers will be taken at the end. Please enter your questions anytime using the question box in the GoToWebinar toolbar. A recording and recap of this webinar will be posted on drought.gov. And now let's get started with our first speaker. Andrea Baer, will pass controls over to you.
All right, thank you, Meredith. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Andrea Baer, and I'm at the Western Region Headquarters Office of the National Weather Service. So I'm physically located in Salt Lake City. I'm going to give the Southwest Dues webinar today, current conditions and outlooks. And I just want to show you a little bit, a map that shows a little bit of what we had over the winter with our small La Nina event under this blue dashed line here. That was our little La Nina event. It won't be recorded as an actual La Nina event, just a cool neutral event, but there she was, short and sweet. So looking back at May, on the left-hand side, I have the precipitation percentiles and the temperature percentiles. So on the top here, on the warm side for much of the Southwest, with the exception of the eastern part of Colorado and New Mexico. And then looking at precipitation, had a few areas with record dry and then record wet. The record wet occurred right here along the borders with California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, and that was just a very short event at the beginning of May. I pulled up some numbers down in Blythe, California, and Kingman, Arizona, and it was between the 2nd and 7th of May, but because it's so unusual to have precipitation in that area since May and June are the driest months down there, it looks like we really had a big event. It was helpful, but not as big as it looks. And then if you look at the anomalies on the right here, on the top is temperatures, and much of the western part of the Southwest registered warmer than normal. And the eastern part cooler than normal. But then again, when you look down here, you really see the extremes with that record dry area on the very south portion of Arizona and New Mexico, and then into California, and then the wet areas really show up well there. So looking at the current drought monitor, I have that down here on the left. This is the current one this week. And I wanted to show a difference between this one and about a month ago. We've had some improvements where that precipitation was that I showed you on the previous slide, and then we've got some areas of degradation. Here's the change map, so you can really nicely see the areas of degradation that that go well with the drought monitors. Worst case, the exceptional drought category, and then where we had some improvement from that helpful precipitation in early May. Quick update on La Nina. It's over. We're currently, the sea surface temperatures firmly reflect ENSO neutral, and they have been that way since April. This graph right here is looking, here is the date line that runs along right there where my arrow is, and about to the eastern edge of Peru. All along the equator from 5 north to 5 south latitude, and gives you a nice look at us coming out of El Nino in earlier in 2024, and then moving into this cool blue area, moving into La Nina. Finally, we get something that actually reflects La Nina in January of this year through early March. But then after that, it was interesting because we had La Nina conditions still in the Central Pacific, and then we started to have some El Nino conditions right off the coast of Peru, and they did have some interesting impacts from that. So kind of interesting phenomenon there with both going on. And now we're very firmly in neutral territory. We do have a few atmospheric La Nina conditions still lingering out there a little bit, which help to keep the La Nina going a little longer, but those even now are pretty much gone. This just shows sea surface temperatures again, what I explained in the last graphic, except a little bit of a different view. So if we're looking at sea surface temperatures in this sweet spot right here, we call Nino 3.4. You can see we're on the cool side of neutral with that minus 0.1 degrees C. We're looking for either plus 0.5 degrees C or minus 0.5 degrees C when we're talking about El Nino or La Nina, and we don't have either. So right now, hitting early June here, we're firmly in a cool neutral here. And then looking down about 300 meters into the ocean, weak above average values have persisted since about April. Looking at the forecasts, I just want to point out that the new ENSO diagnostics discussion, which will update all of this, will be released on June 12th. And then this plume diagram will be updated on the 19th. So wanted to make sure you guys knew that. But the ENSO forecast right now, the gray, we are firmly in neutral, and we stay that way through the September, October, November season. And then as we start to hit fall, further into fall, we get a lot more uncertainty. And that's because we're still a bit in the spring predictability barrier when this forecast was issued. But again, on the 12th, I expect things to start becoming maybe a bit clearer. Hopefully, we'll be able to see a little better of what the fall is going to hold for El Nino or La Nina. And right now, cool La Nina to neutral is forecast. But again, we're still in that difficult time to predict. So I assume now that we're in June, things will clear up a little bit, hopefully. And then looking at the ENSO plume from the International Research Institute, staying right there with neutral, but then models kind of split both ways. Again, that spring predictability barrier brings a lot of uncertainty in the models. I know it's a climate outlook that I'm doing, but I did want to talk about precipitation this week because I'm actually excited. We will have precipitation in the Southwest this week. So on the left here, I have the Weather Prediction Center's excessive rainfall outlook, and we are on the map for a good portion of the Southwest for the next couple of days. And so expecting, some precipitation, but to be in excessive means that our forecasters have a bit more confidence. So that's exciting and welcome news. And then if we look at the 72-hour quantitative precipitation forecast, so this runs through Friday morning, you can see some nice amounts happening in the Southwest, anywhere from just a little bit, 0.01 to about 0.25 in California, all the way to we get into those nice blues as we move eastward in the Southwest. And then SPC actually has something in the convective outlook. So looking at just general thunderstorm risk, we do get into more of a marginal situation for the eastern portion of the Southwest on day 2. So yeah, so nice to see a little bit of convection in those areas. Where we do get excessive rainfall, we could have some flash flood issues, but mostly nice and welcome and beneficial. Okay, so getting into the outlooks, the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook, which is for mid-June, keeps much of the area for leaning above normal. We do get into the 50 to 60% chance of above normal temps in the northern part of the area. And then near normal, so normal conditions expected for mid-June as we get into the precipitation there. So nothing too exciting precipitation-wise after this week. Looking at the June outlooks, I took this from climate.gov. There's a new story on there. I recommend looking at it. It gives a nice explanation of the forecast and why they put what they put on the outlooks. But just to summarize here really quick, so temperatures for June look to lean towards above normal, similar to what you saw in the mid-June forecast I just showed. But then as we get into precipitation, near normal for much of the area, but this nice swath of above normal to likely, and that has to do with this bit of tropical moisture that we're experiencing this week. This was updated on the 31st, so they had the advantage of seeing that. There is another storm down there. Don't know exactly if that'll form into a tropical storm or not, but there is a little wave down there that maybe we'll get a little more moisture, but it's too early to tell. And if that were to form, that would be Barbara. So looking at the 3-month outlooks, oh, I have the wrong, I apologize. I did not change the season. The season is not December, January, February. It is June, July, August. I'll change that on the slides for you guys. But they will be updated on the 19th this month, and looking to be above normal, likely in the summer months for temperatures, and then mostly equal chances for much of the Southwest with a little slight lean towards above to consider the monsoon there, but not a whole lot of confidence there. And the drought outlooks, to continue through the season and also in the monthly drought outlook forecast. So not a lot of relief expected. And just to summarize really quick, we are firmly in ENSO neutral territory, expect to stay that way through the summer. Doesn't have a whole lot of impacts on summer weather, but as we move into fall, it does have impacts. And so we'll see in a couple weeks if the models still hold that we're going to stay neutral, or we might go back into a second year La Nina. That's not an uncommon thing. We also have had occurrences of 3 years back-to-back La Nina events. So a little too early to tell, not a lot of confidence, but I expect that to change in the next few weeks to get a little more confidence. Large portions of the Southwest, will be receiving early helpful June precipitation. This is not the start of the monsoon. It's just a nice little tropical boost from what remains of what was Alvin. And June, July, August outlooks favor warmer than average temperatures, but precipitation's only slightly favored for mostly the Arizona area, and unfortunately just equal chances for the rest of the Southwest. So not enough information to tell at this point. And with that, I will turn it back over. Thank you.
Andrea, that was excellent. Thank you so much. We will now move on to our second speaker, Mike Crimmins, who will provide an update on the 2025 monsoon. Mike,
Hi, everyone.
you see your slides
Okay. Oh, you can hear me okay?
perfectly. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to be here. Again, I'm Mike Crimmins. I'm at the University of Arizona, and I'm down here in Tucson, Arizona, in southern Arizona, and it's one of the most humid, sticky early June days I think I can ever remember here in Tucson in the first couple of days of June. This is typically our climatologically driest time of the year, and I got a half inch of rain at my house this last weekend. So very, very strange time. So I'm going to try to do my best to try to give you an explainer, just a little bit of climatology on the North American monsoon system, what we see here in the Southwest, a little review of last summer, and then just a couple of my thoughts on what we might be looking for coming up here with this monsoon. Okay, so what I first want to do is make the distinction between the winter and summer weather patterns here in the Southwest, and they're really very distinct and very interesting and unique when you compare them side by side. So if we think about the winter circulation pattern, most of the western U.S. is dealing with mid-latitude weather coming from the west, moving to the east. That weather pattern with the jet stream is typically north of the Southwest here in Arizona and New Mexico, and we look to see waves in those jet stream patterns that will drop south through Southern California, move to the Southwest. They'll often drag moisture from the Gulf of Alaska, and then sometimes we're really lucky we'll intersect with some atmospheric river, the Pineapple Express activity out of the subtropics. But largely we are to the south of that active jet stream, and so we'll get long stretches of sunny, dry weather, occasional winter storm systems. And if we look at this graphic here, the cool purple colors are moist climatological moisture during the December through March season, and those hotter colors are going to be dry area. And you can see down in the Southwest, we're at this gradient from north to south. Really, that dry air over the Eastern Pacific is always kind of nudging in here. And so that really needs to get nudged out of the way. So that's our context, weather coming from the west, moving to the east, part of the mid-latitude storm systems in the wintertime. Now, when we move into the monsoon season, or the monsoon system here, the North American monsoon system starts to fire up and expand across Mexico and into the western U.S., the mid-latitude jet stream retreats far, far to the north up into Canada. We get into these kind of real stagnant high pressure weather systems. And what we're really looking for is that subtropical high pressure ridge from the south to move up into the Southwest. And that will reverse our wind flow direction in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere from southwest, south to southeast. And then that really helps set up the stage of moving in the moist maritime tropical air mass to the south. And this puts a little finer point on that. You can see that dry air over the East Pacific is now nudged to the north, and there's a nice plume of tropical, subtropical moisture that extends up through Mexico. And that's really what we're trying to interact with up into the Southwest and even a little bit further north by the time we hit into the monsoon season. Okay, so if we just look at that progression, I'm talking about, again, the mid-levels of the atmosphere, 15, 20,000 feet. We look at the broad circulation pattern here. We have broad areas of high pressure system to the south over close to the equator, just north of the equator now when we're into the northern hemisphere summer. And north of those high pressure systems, weather is moving from west to east, so follow those arrows. And if we move forward into June, the expansion of those high pressure systems lifting north, still on the northern periphery of the high pressure system, so we're still getting that westerly flow. But we're really looking for, as we get from June transitioning into July, of the high pressure system expanding and really starting to set up overhead better if it's up over the four corners. We'll talk a little bit about that. And so that we then get on the southern side of that high pressure system in broad easterly flow. And that's where we transition really from a mid-latitude climate to a tropical, subtropical climate with the transition into the monsoon. Okay, this is a lot going on here, and we'll share the slide here, but I just wanted you to kind of scan for the patterns here. And so If you go down the rows, we're going in time. So starting at the top would be about June 15th. Then we go July 15th, August 15th, September 15th. And so we're the beginning of the monsoon, tied to the peak of the monsoon, August 15th, and out. And I just want to show you, this is that, again, that mid-level high pressure system. You can see how subtle it is and how it moves north, kind of fills in and weakens, and then is really rapidly moving out as we get into September. And you can kind of think of it following a little bit of lagging of the sun angle here too. If we look at precipitation, you can see it moving up the spine of the mountains in Mexico. We look at moisture here, you can see where the dry air to the north now is sort of getting shunted north. And we're now really pulling up moisture from the Gulf of California and into eastern New Mexico out of the Gulf of Mexico. And this purple color over here is going to be convective available potential energy. So you can just give you a sense of where that convective instability is starting to come together with moisture and temperature across the Southwest. So real subtle movement in that upper level high pressure system leads to these big broad changes across the Southwest. Another visualization here, if we can think about at the lower levels of the atmosphere, just an atmospheric moisture threshold. June 15th is this pink line, July 1st is green, July 15th and August 1st. So from that beginning, we're just a couple weeks away, all the way through the peak of the monsoon. You can see how this air mass boundary really starts to move north. And really, you can, if you've ever been in Las Vegas in the summertime, you know you're kind of looking to the south, and the moisture is not very far away, but you're often in that hot, dry air. But that moisture boundary really starts to set up right along the Colorado River and kind of gets stuck. Sometimes it'll move into Southern California, but often that's the climatological northern periphery of that maritime air mass. And here's a cartoon graphic that just shows the broad circulation patterns when we're in kind of an ideal mode here is that upper level, mid-level, high pressure system over the Four Corners. We call it Four Corners high pressure system. It gets so hot in the lower Colorado River Valley, you'll see a low pressure form, a thermal low. And then these machinations really kind of work together as that thermal low can help induce Gulf surges of moisture up the Gulf of California. We're looking to have an active monsoon in northern Mexico, which can release these outflow boundaries. And then occasionally we can get moisture working through the valley passes here from the east, from the Gulf of Mexico into southern New Mexico and into southern Arizona. Okay, climatologically, just looking at the precipitation patterns across the months here, I just realized that this graphic is a little out of order here, but the lower left here is June, and then you can see here that most of that is eastern New Mexico springtime rainfall, not monsoon yet. We're starting to get some higher elevation rainfall. Upper right here is July, expands across southern Arizona, starts to reach the higher elevations, typically peak in August in this upper left here. And then the lower left here, I got to get these in the right order again, we start to come back out of the monsoon, and most of the precipitation is more terrain locked into the higher elevations. And again, put it all together here, you can see real strong elevation gradients across the higher elevations, and the lower elevation areas of Arizona see much less precipitation, but overall puts together the climatological context. Okay, so quickly here, what happened in 2024, we saw basically a much weaker monsoon than we had seen in a couple of the previous years. It's slightly better than 2023, but overall the lower deserts and kind of the middle parts of the higher elevations of Arizona saw below average precipitation, got a much better precipitation amounts across southeast Arizona and then over northern, and then it was kind of a mixed bag across New Mexico. And if we put this together in the longer context, see 2024 was just slightly more than 2023, much better than 2020, but we've had kind of a run of a couple of pretty poor monsoons. But then we had 2021 and 2022 really stand out as quite a bit of precipitation in the last 120 years or so. And I think I'm going to do a quick look at a couple of these. The high pressure system was in pretty much the right spot, but it was a little bit weaker and a little bit further south. And there was the lobe of high pressure extended out in the East Pacific. And this led to kind of mediocre moisture, not as much as we would normally like to see, and kind of we had a nice start to the monsoon, but then it really faltered towards late July and late August. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple of these and just get to the looking ahead here. And my crystal ball is pretty fuzzy right now. There's very little to lock onto, and so I've been kind of poring over a couple of these products. Andrea showed us a couple earlier. I looked at the weeks 3-4 precipitation outlook by the National the NOAA Climate Prediction Center, and we see unequal chances here, but in the discussion, I saw a little bit of a hint that there may be some Madden-Julian oscillation activity that might start to help strengthen the subtropical ridge in the next couple of weeks towards the later part of the month. That could help kickstart the monsoon, but we're in this unsettled weather pattern right now, and that's giving me a little bit of pause that we might struggle at the beginning here. This is the broad model suite from last month across all the models. And so what we're going to be looking for now is the update coming up in the next couple of days that'll update this suite of models. The National Multi-Model Ensemble in this upper left here is showing this, which I think is a little bit encouraging, this ring of dry around the southwest that can often indicate that the ridge is in a good position, but there's a little bit of weakness here. And then the International Multi-Model Ensemble in the lower right here is sort of showing something similar. Both of these are not indicating wet. They're kind of shrugging for the most part or near average. And so I just think that we don't have a lot to go on right now. So I'm really hoping that we'll get a little bit more of a signal in the next couple of weeks to look at. Okay, so closing thoughts here. I'm really seeing these kind of mixed signals for monsoon onset. We're in this unsettled weather pattern right now, wet conditions in the early part of June. There's not necessarily any correlation there that for the rest of the monsoon, but it tends to indicate that we're not moving into a real strong ridge pattern that we would need ahead of the monsoon onset to be on time later in part of the month. Again, that MJO activity suggests that we may rapidly switch into a very hot and dry ridge pattern, which would be normal for June, and that would then lead to hopefully an on-time onset in late June, early July for Arizona and New Mexico. We also have to pay attention to the sea surface temperatures up the Gulf of California. If they're cool and lagging, that then can stunt the moisture availability. They're already above average, which is important. And as we get hot temperatures, that will really help them rapidly move up in temperature. Kind of looking for the rest of the season here too. The NOAA CPC outlook came out last month for below average Eastern Pacific hurricane activity. We already have had Alvin, and Andrea noted that another one might be in the works in the next couple of weeks. And so that's a pretty good start for a below average season. We'll have to see for the rest of it. If we see below average, we'll have less opportunity for those to induce Gulf surges and have direct hits later in the season and later in August and Pacific. So I'm seeing a mixed bag right here, and I'm not super sure what to settle on, wet or drier. And so I think I'm just going to have to wait a couple of weeks, and we'll just have to wait and see. Just finally, some stuff that we've got here going on here at University of Arizona. We've got something called Southwest Monsoon Fantasy Forecast. So if you're interested in trying your hand and seeing if you can predict what the totals will be at 5 cities across the Southwest and just have some fun with that and track other things, check out Monsoon Fantasy. And we'll be doing a podcast through the summer as well to talk about conditions as we move along. So thanks very much, and I'll be around for questions at the end.
Mike, that was great. I really appreciate the explainer at the beginning and highlighting some really fun, innovative resources at the University of Arizona. And your wait and see was a perfect segue for me to make a quick announcement to wait and see, because in a couple of weeks, NIDIS, working with our close partners, will be releasing an updated monsoon drought update. So stay tuned for that. And now, wrapping us up, our final presentation, we will have Jim Wallman provide a Southwest wildland fire potential outlook. Jim, we see your slides. You're good to go.
Okay, thank you, Meredith. And I want to thank Andrea and Mike for providing such a great lead into this talk, because some of the things that I was going to bring up and I normally bring up, they already touched on, so I'll be very brief when I get to those. So just starting off here, just kind of what goes into it. How do we make that sausage? We look at the current conditions: snowpack, recent precipitation, drought, soil moisture. Look at fuel loading, phenology, which is for the fuels and your fine fuels like your grasses and your shrubs. Where are they in the curing process? Are they greening up? Or in some of the deciduous forests in the east, is it leaf on or leaf off? Fire season timing, we kind of get that from just like looking at those other conditions. And then we look at the weather and climate outlooks. One thing that I'm going to also show, in addition to the climate outlooks, is past year's analogs. We find a lot of utility in looking at past year's analogs to try to figure out what is going to happen this summer. It's not great, but it can give you maybe a little bit more confidence in what the models are showing, like Mike just did. Then we kind of blend that together to forecast above and below normal significant fire potential. And just keep in mind that we're forecasting potential, not explicitly activity. The other things are a normal for one area is going to be different from normal from another area, and it varies by time of year. So, for example, Northern California in August, typically very active. You're going to have several significant fires there on average over the course of the summer. But if you were to go into, say, Florida in the middle of summer, it's typically their wet season, so they don't have any significant fires. So just keep that in mind that it is variable across the country. So I'm just going to kind of go into the weather, and Andrew already covered some of this, but I really want to focus on the winter, what happened there. This is percent of average precipitation in the lower left, and then temperatures on the right. And due to that weak La Nina, we did have quite a warm and dry winter in much of the Southwest, especially from Central California and Central Nevada and Utah southward. Some areas received less than 25% of the normal precipitation. Temperatures were also on average above normal, and that not only did that not produce the amount of precipitation, so we may not have all the grasses that we typically do in the lower elevations, but the higher elevations are likely to be stressed. We cannot make that up in the course of the spring as we head into the fire season, so it becomes a really more difficult to do. Just going into May, Andrea already showed this. I'm just going to kind of just highlight again here. We are watching that warm and dry spring overall in central and northern California into northern Nevada and Utah, also the west slope of Colorado. That is a concern. The snow came off a bit faster than normal. Even though the snowpack was generally near normal there, it has come off quite a bit faster, and that's what I'm showing here. So on the left here, this is the west-wide snowpack as of the end of March, which is typically when we see our peak snowpack, especially in the Sierra, near normal snowpack there. But as you look on the right-hand side, the snowpack numbers by mid-May were pretty low once you got down to the Sierra. Generally less than 50% of the average snowpack was left there. And you can see the lack of snow overall in the Southwest, especially in Arizona and New Mexico, but also portions of Utah and Southwest Colorado. So another things that we kind of look at is the fine fuels, abundant fuels, and carryover. We have a lot of carryover from last year's wet winter, from the winter of 2023 and 2024. There was a lot of grass that grew in Central California and also across northern Nevada and northern Utah, northern portions of the Great Basin. A lot of that is still around because it was a bit warmer over the winter in a lot of these areas, so we didn't quite get the snowpack to mat that down. And then you add in like at least a decent amount of moisture over the winter in those areas, especially Northern California and Northern Nevada. Then we're having another grass crop. It's not as robust as last year, but you add that to last year and that becomes a concern. So now kind of transition to Southwest. This is one of Mike's products. He worked with Chuck Maxwell in the Southwest. This is one of the things I want to bring up because Andrew mentioned the rain that's going through, that May is overall, or not May, but June is expected to be overall wetter than normal in Arizona. However, once we get a few days out, it starts to dry significantly. And this is what these dots represent, is the burn period and the number of hours for each day. And that's based on all the raws. And it's a number of hours per day at a relative humidity at or below 20%. And this is not often correlated to when fires are most active in the Southwest. So this is a really good indicator showing that while it's wet now, we are expecting to see that drier period as we head into mid-month. The other thing I want to show here is just kind of, this is an energy release component. Looks at generally your drier fuels, your larger fuels, and I'm looking at the rim here to kind of show that we did hit the 97th percentile for the rim a couple of days ago at the end. Fortunately, we haven't seen the fire activity there. But you can tell that the fuels are stressed. Now, this recent drop here, you can see in the green, drop below the 90th percentile recently. If you look back to the last wet period we had, back in early May, which Andrea mentioned. Didn't quite get the rain there, but it was cool and moist enough to drop the energy release component quite a bit. But you can see how quickly it rebounded. When these warm and dry conditions start in a few days, we will expect to see this rapidly rebound to the typical peak fire season conditions, which is this gray line, and possibly above the 97th percentile. Hopefully, we will not be setting any records, but it does look pretty dry going forward. So now kind of the outlook. Just going to gloss over this here because Andrea already kind of showed this. There's a couple of other model ideas looking at the what the forecast for the ENSO condition is and generally neutral conditions off of both the similar to what Andrea already showed. Now I'm going to get into these analogs, and I'm just going to look at June here. And so we've looked at what the ENSO trend is from previous years, generally what's happened over the past few months to kind of come up with these analogs. And we came up with like these 10 years that are down here below. Some of these are pretty significant in portions of California and Nevada and portions of Southwest, 2006 being one. Also, 2017 and 2021 are significant, especially in California. So we're seeing come with these big fire years, and averaging these conditions that last 10 years, it was warm and dry out west, especially in California, centered on Nevada, but also into the Southwest. So warm, and also generally a slightly drier than normal June in the areas. You can see that area where, at least in past years, there was a bit of a wetter signal in New Mexico, and whether that's tied to an early onset of the monsoon, I didn't dig into that, but it generally was wetter where it could have been just more enhanced late spring precipitation, especially across eastern New Mexico. But the one thing is, it's generally warm and dry, and especially that dryness in the spring shows up to the north, across the northern Rockies. Now we go the next, add that out, go from June then to August. And it's a very similar signal, especially focused on California, Nevada, and Utah. Maybe a little bit cooler due to more cloud cover in the monsoon, especially in southeast Arizona into Mexico, but also showing generally a more robust monsoon in these years, even though there's not, Mike is showing, we don't have that confidence. At least past years have shown that. So hopefully if we see these trends continue in the next month, Mike will have a more robust forecast. But at least now what this is making us think that we're not going to have a really dry monsoon like 2020. So at least expecting that we're going to be able to shut down most of the Southwest for fire activity, at least Arizona and New Mexico. So I'm going to just gloss over the June outlook here. Andrew already went over this. A lot of that in Arizona is really, in the Four Corners, is based on these first few days in the month. So, and we're already in the backside of that. We know it's going to turn drier. Going ahead for the following 3 months, I wanted to show July to September because we normally go out 4 months in our outlooks. And that trend of, generally above normal temperatures in much of the West is going to continue. It does have that signal there in the Southwest from CPC, kind of, especially Arizona, maybe chances are a little bit better having a wetter monsoon, but to the north of that, pretty dry. So how does this make it into the outlooks? What does it look like, the outcomes? So here's what we had for June in the Southwest. Fortunately, it has been relatively cool and enough moisture at times to keep the Southwest pretty quiet so far. We have had a couple large fires. Right now, it'll probably be quiet for the next few days, but we expect when this next dry period hits that it's going to get a lot busier in Arizona and New Mexico, probably for a 2 to 3 week period starting mid-month until the monsoon really begins in earnest by early to mid-July. Also, the same things, those same ideas are up into southern Utah and southwest Colorado, maybe the Spring Mountains of Nevada, where we have the drought stress from over the winter, the really dry conditions in timbered fuel areas. When we move into California, the Sierra probably going to start a bit earlier than normal. We already had one significant fire near Mono Lake in California in the eastern Sierra. So that's showing us that the fuels are more stressed than we've seen in the last couple of years there. And then as you go to the central and southern California coast, it's mainly due to that dry winter, but we had a timely precipitation in February and March. So you normally think because of a drier winter, we wouldn't have as much grass. However, we still have last year's grass. And because it fell at the right time, we actually have a decent grass crop in some of those lower elevations as well in central and southern California and the foothills. Now you go to the Sacramento Valley, they have last year's abundant growth and another good year, decent to above normal year. And you head into western Nevada, there's a lot of grass from last year, not as much this year, but you have a lot of standing grass from last year. We're already starting to see fuel moistures in sagebrush well below normal for the time of the year. And so the sagebrush could become available probably by mid-month and start contributing to fire spread. So continuing into July, pretty much in the southwest, Colorado, we're expecting a normal trend. Like we could still have a few big fires in early July, which is not unusual. So that's pretty normal. But then we expect it to kind of quiet down quite a bit, which is normal there for July into southwest Colorado. Maybe with the monsoon being toward the latter half of the month, that the stress fuels and higher elevations of southern Utah and Nevada will probably stay that way at least until mid-month. And then as we go into California and northern Nevada, we're expecting more of those fuels come online, especially the northern Sierra and northwest California, northeast California, where we have good grass crops. And then because we had two good grass crops now in northern Nevada, those fuels, when they finally dry out by later this month to early July, they will become available. 2006 was one very wet winter, but it turned into a big fire season as well for northern Nevada. There were numerous large fires burning well over 1 million acres that summer, so that's a concern, and we're seeing the same signs there. August, not much of a difference, pretty much the same areas, although we are going to go back to normal in the southern Great Basin areas, southern Nevada, southern Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Mexico, normal due to the monsoon. But much of California will stay above normal and into western and northern Nevada. You also see that warm and dry signal that we're seeing in the spring to the north, in the northwestern U.S. I'll just touch on that for a bit. We're already starting to see large fires there. We have a almost 1,000-acre fire in Montana that started over the weekend. We're starting to see a lot of the 50 to 100-acre fires showing up in the Northwest now too, which is extremely early. Normally in a big year, we start to see those mid to late June, but we're already seeing them in late May and early June. So we're really concerned up there as well, and possibly into the Great Lakes. What that does is when we're stretched that thin, we're spread our resources across a much greater footprint of the country. So that could affect, how big the fires get in California because we are stretched so thin. We can't send everything to California if California is burning, if we have fires burning everywhere else as well. So that's just another concern. And then as we get into September, normally it starts to cool off in especially the northwestern quarter of the country, but probably with cold fronts, dry cold fronts initially. They will keep going, but that above normal potential in California will go in. And we could also start seeing potentially more offshore wind events as we get into September as well, especially toward the latter half of the month. So that could become a bigger concern for some of those offshore areas along the coast and into the Sierra foothills. Whereas Nevada, they will probably start to quiet down the latter half of the month, but still be a concern there in western and northern Nevada. That's all I have here. So I don't have a summary slide for you, but pretty much expect an active summer kind of moving from the southwest up into the California, Nevada as we head through the summer.
That's great, Jim. The additional context you provided for each of those monthly outlooks and the role of antecedent fuel conditions across a region, that was very useful. Appreciate you walking us through that. We are now going to have our speakers take your questions. As a reminder, Please enter your questions in the question box and go to webinar and identify when possible if your question is for a specific speaker. So we'll go ahead and get started. Jim, since we just ended with you, why don't I go ahead and pass this to you? The question is, how has prescribed fires been going this year? Do you have any update on any big successes with clearing out high-risk areas?
Uh, there have been some prescribed burns going on so far. I was actually on a talk yesterday where they had some successes up in central Idaho with one of the prescribed burns near McCall. But overall, I have not heard anything different so far this year, that some of the prescribed burns are going as planned. But as we start to have this drier condition, we probably won't be here. They probably will be shutting down earlier than normal uh, due to the drier conditions.
That's great. Thank you. The next question is, I'm going to pass it to Andrea and Mike primarily. In the last couple of weeks in Northeast Nevada, there's been higher than normal temperatures by as much as 12 to 13 degrees. The afternoons have been cloudy with precipitation. This seems more like July and August. Could this be La Nina or is it still neutral?
I can start with that, and Mike can chime in if he has something to add. But no, I wouldn't say this would be La Nina. La Nina, the La Nina event pretty much died back in April for the most part. There's been a little bit of an atmospheric response, but not enough that it would change weather patterns in that area for that short amount of time. When we're looking at how El Nino or La Nina impacts our weather patterns, we're looking at it more on the scale of like the winter. So for example, this past winter's been pretty dry in the Southwest for the most part. And that's the kind of trend we see when we're in a La Nina situation. So it's more of a seasonal scale as opposed to just a couple weeks. So the couple weeks that you're talking about are definitely more on the weather time scale. Yeah, so not really La Nina or neutral situation. Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I completely agree, Andrea. I think that if we were looking at kind of a lagging, persistent La Nina response, we typically would see that those dry conditions extend well into the spring and even lead to an enhanced progression of the subtropical ridge in June. So what we see in some research is that if we're in mature La Nina conditions, we'll actually have an earlier onset because of a broad ridge across the west. And like you said, this is completely the opposite. Very strange spring.
Yeah. Beneficial, we love it, but yeah, we can't blame it on La Nina.
Okay, thank you. This question is for Jim and Andrea. Is there a heightened concern since the last few years because the overnight lows have not cooled off? And then going into the fire element, CAL FIRE has started beefing up its aerial nighttime firefighting training exercises because burns have raged overnight in California. Do you have any response?
I'll go ahead and start with this one, Meredith. We do have some increased concern because we have noticed the same thing has been occurring into Nevada and also into other portions of the West, that it's not just a function of temperature, it's also a function of the overnight relative humidity, where if you're generally warmer, your relative humidity doesn't get as high. You don't have that recovery. So those burn periods are a lot longer. And so they're burning more well into the night. The other thing that also affects is the vapor pressure deficit, which doesn't necessarily affect the dead fuels on the ground, but it's your live fuels. Your vapor pressure deficit is just a function of the temperature and the relative humidity. And so when you see these really warmer overnights, your pressure deficit would be greater, and that could put greater stress on some of your live fuels like your brush and dry them out quicker than we would see.
And I'll just add from a health perspective, yeah, those overnight very warm temperatures definitely adds stress to the body because you don't have time to recover. So when we have those very warm nights, it does make for a concern for health issues as well. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the fire aspect of it, so thanks, Jim. But yeah, from a health perspective, it definitely, and we have been seeing warmer lows overnight the past several years. So that is a trend that is happening in a lot of places, including the Southwest.
Okay, thank you. Jim, this question is for you. Has there been any discussion about the Santa Anas in Southern California? Our catastrophic fire events tend to be wind rather than fuel driven, and the frustration is that most of our native plant communities have been replaced by dry, exotic, flashy fuels.
As far as the Santa Ana season, that's always a concern because we do have to worry about the grasses and the strength of the wind pushing the fires. As far, I mean, I'm not a fuels specialist or a vegetation specialist, so the exotic grasses, which whether it's like a warm type grass like buffalo grass or cheatgrass, especially in the northern half state, those are a problem because they do crowd out more typically adapted grasses, but the shrubs are still the same, like your chaparral, your chamise type of fuels that they are going to be available. But that extra fuel load from the grass can be a concern. But when you get a good wind on a fire, as long as you have just enough fuel, it's going to burn. And so in a typical Santa Ana area, your winds are strong enough to really dominate the landscape. And so if you're in most of those conditions, the fuels are enough anyway, unless it's been recently burned.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, our next we only have a couple more questions, so thank you for sticking with us. And this one is more specific to Las Vegas area. Is monsoon season expected to be any more active than last year in Southern Nevada, considering how weak of a season we had here last year? So maybe I'll turn that to Mike.
It's a good question. So what I was struck by was seeing all the rain that Las Vegas got in May, which should have been its driest month of the year. I'm hoping you're not, just getting your monsoon way, way, way too early. I think for Las Vegas to have a really strong monsoon season, the rest of the Southwest actually has to be in a pretty strong season as well. So that would mean that we have broad monsoon ridge across the Southwest, real active daily precipitation going on across Arizona and New Mexico, and that activity is then kind of getting recycled and moving up around the high pressure system up into Northwest Arizona and Southern Nevada. And that typically doesn't happen until kind of middle to later part of the season. The caveat on all this is that if a tropical storm moves right up the Gulf of California, sometimes they can march right up the Colorado River, and the whole western Arizona, Southern Nevada, and then Eastern Southern California can end up having very wet seasons. But that's typically later. And I'm thinking of storms like Hillary a couple of years ago that are happening in September. So I'm pulling for you. And if Las Vegas goes wet, that's usually a good sign that the rest of the Southwest has done well as well.
I'm going to direct this question, and this might be one of our last questions here. This one possibly to Andrea. This is about wind, which we've touched on a couple of times. Are there any new trends in terms of wind? This is usually a huge concern for the North Bay area above the San Francisco Bay. Every year it seems windier more often. So any reactions to trends in wind?
Oh, that's a hard one. um, Gosh, I would have to look into some things for that. I don't know off the top of my head of any um, studies or things that I like that I've seen for that area talking about an increase in winds. Um, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have a lot to add to that question.
I can add something, I think, Andrew, not so
Great.
much the wind part. I think, when it comes to fire, that we are seeing a trend in the wetter season for Central and Northern California starting later. And so typically in the past, when we'd see some of these stronger wind events, they would occur sometimes after we've gotten our first really good storm in California, which really lessens the fire threat. We're not seeing that as much anymore. So we're starting to see uh, the potential for some of these wind events to coincide with the drier fuels.
Great, thanks for chiming in on that. And we're going to wrap this up with one last question going back to drought. Um, I realize that some of these questions are very geographic specific, and this is intended as a kind of broader regional webinar, but perhaps one of our speakers can speak to North Central New Mexico, which right now has, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, D3 drought, which is extreme drought. If this area does not get a good monsoon, how will that change the wildfire outlook for north central New Mexico? Recent storms have missed many areas in this region.
Well, if we don't see an active monsoon, then we are concerned. Then the fire potential would definitely be probably above normal because we typically see it quiet down. One thing that's important to mention with the monsoon that my colleagues in the Southwest, working with Mike, Chuck Maxwell, and Rich Naden, they have looked at the monsoon as not necessarily the precipitation as much as the increased atmospheric moisture keeping relative humidity higher also has a significant impact. So if we're seeing, even if you're not seeing maybe more, a lot of rain directly in your area, if it's occurring at least nearby, and your relative humidity is consistent with the elevated moisture levels typical of the monsoon, probably would still expect to see normal fire potential there.
Excellent. Okay, and that's it for our questions. One last enormous thank you to Andrea, Mike, and Jim for taking the time to create and deliver such informative presentations. Before we close our webinar today, I have a few very quick announcements. Reminder, if you are not already signed up for a regional drought early warning system listserv, please do. These lists will keep you informed on the latest regional drought updates, webinars, meetings, and partner news. The sign up link is in your chat box, and we have 3 in the Southwest area: California, Nevada, Intermountain West, and Southern Plains. And a reminder that a recording and webinar recap will be emailed and posted on drought.gov shortly. It'll also be sent to your inbox. Please look for that monsoon-focused drought status update for the Southwest in a few weeks. And finally, please take a minute to complete a short post-webinar survey that will pop up once you close the webinar. This will help NIDIS and our partners improve our delivery of drought information to the region, and we appreciate your input. This webinar is now concluded. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again in future NIDIS webinars.